So I will be joined very shortly by Travis Gelbrich. Here he is. Hello, Travis.
Good morning from Seattle. How are you, Chloe?
I'm not so bad. I'm not so bad. Having a really nice time at this event, actually. So,
Good.
sorry.
Go ahead.
So, Travis, I just want to give a quick introduction to you before we jump into some questions. So, Travis is a true customer advocate, and he started his career at Microsoft, worked for a while with Alaskan Airlines, and more recently has joined PetCo. And he's really focused on building customer centricity and kind of customer-led initiatives, basically. So we're going to be kind of chatting a little bit about that, and Travis is going to be explaining how he leverages data to foster that sense of customer centricity across the business. Before we get stuck in, I just want to remind everyone that our Q&A box is open, so do go ahead and spam us with any questions that you have. So, Travis, would you mind just by giving us a little bit more background on yourself and telling us a little bit about your role at PetCo?
You bet. Thanks, Chloe. I'll start by just talking a little bit about PetCo. We're a health and wellness company. Our goal is improving the lives of pets, pet parents, and our own employees. We offer merchandise, companion animals, grooming and training services, as well as a growing network of veterinary clinics and mobile vaccination clinics. We have 1,500 pet care centers across the U.S., Mexico, and Puerto Rico. And I'm currently the vice president of customer care there, as you mentioned, and but I think like a lot of customer care or customer service leaders, I started out leading customer service, but got very passionate about customers and the issues that they're dealing with, that we were taking calls for, or that we just saw from our vantage point in the organization. And that was definitely the case for me. So starting out at Microsoft, I kind of came up through the customer service organization, but really got passionate about customer experience and had different leadership positions, both in customer service leadership, but also around customer experience and customer advocacy. Then at Alaska Airlines, I led a lot of different customer-focused functions, everything from research and insights, social care, customer care, to also in-flight service. And that was a great experience. And then again, here at PetCo, then I lead customer care.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for running that down. So we're here to talk all about leveraging data to foster that customer centricity that I mentioned, and also to help about how that data can help, to prioritize the CX initiatives. So I want to start kind of at the beginning with this and just ask you, how can businesses ensure that they're collecting useful data?
Yeah, it's really easy to start with the channels, thinking about social or surveys. But what I have learned over the years is it's better to start with how you're going to action the data. So let me give a couple of examples. It can be hard to decipher actionability out of some survey results because you don't know is the overall satisfaction score or what the customer's thinking about. Is it about the product or the service that they purchased and something was wrong with the way the company designed that? Or was it about how it was actually executed? So there was a quality flaw or a service flaw. And so being able to think about design, meaning the design of the product, the design of the service, the policies that the company made decisions about, and separate that from execution, which is how did we actually execute on that? I think being able to think critically about those two components and be deliberate about that, even in survey questions or how we interpret unstructured data, I think is really important. Another one is thinking about structured versus unstructured data or quantitative versus qualitative data. So what are the things that we want to track consistently over time? And usually having a survey, for example, with a structured sample methodology so that you get consistency over time is important. Where if you think of other things like survey verbatims or social media posts, those are more unstructured and qualitative. They give you a different type of insight and a different way of thinking about actioning that data versus tracking data. And then once you've thought through those things, then it's obviously important to think about channel, meaning that survey data is going to give you a different kind of insight because those are people who usually have had an experience and you're asking them about that experience afterwards, where social media is very different. it's much more free flow, and it's much more subject to PR events or things that happen to your brand, and maybe isn't the best way to track over time how a particular area of the business or a particular customer touch point is doing. So I think you have to think about all those things so that you can bring it to bear on insights that drive different decisions, that kind of highlight customer pain points to go take action on. But having a thoughtful approach is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess once a company, rather not a customer, once a company has a good kind of grasp on that data, how would you say they could or should even use those findings to promote customer centricity? And I guess in this, I want you to kind of draw on your own experiences and tell us how you've done that throughout your career.
Sure. A couple lessons I've learned again and again. One is really understand how the organization makes decisions and where they put investment, and not just how they talk about it, but actually, if you think about important prioritization decisions, trade-off decisions, where they're making investments, understanding that is really important, because if you don't understand that and you're trying to drive customer centricity for the sake of customer centricity without the context of the business, it's really an uphill battle. So I think step one is really understand how is the company making important decisions. Two is go find a meeting or a rhythm or a muscle that the company already has, whether it's how they're managing revenue or cost or operations, and try to integrate customer data and insights into that structure. Oftentimes in my own career, you get all excited because you get the data together and you think you have a compelling story, but then you go create a new meeting or you create a new rhythm of meetings, and what you're doing is you're creating one more extra thing for business leaders to do. But again and again, I've learned that if you understand that, hey, there's this operational review over here, all of the leaders that I need to influence are kind of clicked into this process, it's much, much easier to go leverage that, whether integrate into that existing meeting or create something that looks exactly like it. Therefore, you're using an existing muscle in the organization to get kind of customer data and action out of customer data in front of business leaders. The third would be to find a good sponsor, like someone, a senior sponsor in the organization who shares your passion for customers, and can help you navigate all that and kind of help just drive more visibility to the work, but also the customer pain points. And then finally, I really think, and what I'm always aspiring for, is best practice is that you have business leaders talking about customer metrics with the same attention and vigor as revenue or cost or operational metrics. So oftentimes we talk about those kind of financial metrics in one place or in one vein, but then we talk about customer metrics someplace else. But yet they have an impact on each other. So decisions that we're making about controlling costs definitely can impact customers. And so, but if you're talking about that at the same time as those other metrics, then you're really having a more holistic view, and you're going to get more focus on those metrics.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting because in our first session today, Yarko was talking about how he never has to worry about the profit margins when he's approaching CX, and it was because it's a public company, and it was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another way that data can be used is in prioritizing these CX initiatives when you're trying to build that customer centricity. So me and you have previously discussed your prioritization method and how you kind of present that to the enterprise. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about this and explain how you use it?
Yeah, if you're sifting through the data and insights, in most cases, there are more customer pain points than you can possibly get at in any kind of time frame. And so prioritizing that becomes important. And what I've learned is to think about it in two ways. So frequency, meaning I have a customer pain point, how often is that happening, and how many customers is that happening? And so it could be something that's happening to only a few customers, which may not mean it's a priority amongst other things, or it may be something that's happened to all customers or nearly all customers. So understanding that is important. The second is severity. And so when it does happen to a customer, how painful is it? If it happens to one customer and there's 100% chance that they're going to leave the company and move to another brand or competitor, that understanding the severity becomes really important. In some cases, you can also think of severity as, hey, this is only happening to high value customers. So for example, using an airline context, this issue is only happening to people sitting in first class, or is only happening to people who are like our elites. And so understanding that severity when the issue does happen. And so imagine that on like a 4-box grid, and the things that are high severity, meaning really painful, and high frequency, that's what you're going to go run after first. Now, granted, in the background, there's kind of an effort to the fix and the cost and that kind of stuff. But I find it to be helpful to think about severity and frequency first, both at an enterprise level, but like at PetCo right now, we're using that in the contact centers to understand for our customer service satisfaction results, which are the things that we are seeing as an issue for many customers and are having a lower score, more severity. And we're trying to tackle those things first, because we know that if we can solve those, mathematically, we're going to have a bigger swing positively on our survey results.
Thank you. And that's really kind of helpful to hear about that, because I think that a lot of people in CX can be quite overwhelmed, particularly if it's a smaller team or even a one-man show. It can be quite overwhelming to know, okay, where do we start? Where do we start with this? So yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Another thing that I want to talk to you about is, we've spoken about kind of how you can get people on board a little bit, but I want to kind of maybe dig deeper into that. So we know that collaboration is really important when you're trying to change a company culture to be more customer focused. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to collaboration with colleagues, and how this kind of nurtures centricity and, I guess, ultimately loyalty?
Yeah, you bet. It's really easy for those of us who are passionate about the customer experience to just kind of expect everyone else to get it. And they expect everyone else to have the same level of passion that we do. And although I wish that was always the case, that isn't always the case. So I think one, like we talked about before, really understanding what's the priority for the organization, and how they make decisions, number one. Second, though, is try to understand, whether it's at the enterprise level or a division level or a team level, understand the business objectives of that team and try to put the customer kind of elements that you're focused on in context of those business objectives. So like you mentioned before, we all wish that people, that as we're driving financial results, people would see and understand that, hey, if we take care of the customer, it's going to have a positive impact on our financial results. Another example of that is retention, meaning, hey, if we do a better job of taking care of the customer, we're going to retain more customers. They're going to keep spending with us, and that's going to, have a positive impact on whatever the financial business objective that business leader or division has. Also, just understanding that those people are really busy. And they have many, many priorities. So understanding where you can remove roadblocks for them and just make it easier for them to kind of consume the customer data you want or take action on it in the way you want. And then finally, just be curious. Organizations oftentimes are big places, and you think you maybe have a lay of the land, but so often there's always things to learn. And you may think you know what another team does, but you don't really understand. And so always being curious, and just, it's not a like one and done, you figured it out. It's always a journey in terms of how can you advocate better for customers, drive more actionability out of the data that you're putting in front of them. So it's definitely a journey.
Thank you. And yeah, but a session that we ran yesterday with Mary Beth from Lowe's, she was talking a lot about finding out more about the rest of the team's jobs and what do they do. And then you can truly kind of say, well, there's actually more scope for you to be a little bit more customer centric with this part or this part. So I love what you just said there about staying curious about people's roles. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanna talk a little bit about when things go wrong. So what are some mistakes that you've seen CX teams who can remain nameless? Some mistakes that you've seen CX teams make when they're kind of trying to approach this customer data and analytics point. And yeah, drawing on personal experience would be great.
Yeah. Two things come to mind, and I think most people have probably seen both these. One is, it's really easy to start to slice up the survey results and filter the results, because you have business leaders come at you and say, well, I shouldn't be held accountable for these interactions with brand new employees, or I shouldn't be held accountable for this piece of the survey results. And I have a really strong belief and really principle that if someone's taking the time to fill out a survey, it's a customer who had an experience with our company, regardless of what the background is. And we really should be looking at all of the survey results, and not let business owners or other people kind of filter it down. I think that's really, really important. The second is, once you've identified, using survey results or other channels of feedback, once you've identified a customer pain point, it's easy to kind of claim a win once we've taken some action. But my belief is that you have to look at where you found the issue. Let's say it was an attribute question on a survey that said this particular part of the experience was not going well, and that is trending down or is not where you want it to be, and you found an issue. That issue, in my mind, isn't solved until you've seen that number go back where you want it to be. But so often we say, oh, we've taken an action, we've solved what we think the issue is, and we move on. But if the customer's still telling us it's broken, then it's still broken. And so I think in both of those cases, using all of the customer data, not letting the organization off the hook, by filtering it or by saying that we've solved the problem when customers are still telling us the problem is there. I think those are both pitfalls.
Thank you. I guess, yeah, there's that kind of point of keeping your eyes open. And as you said, it's not fixed until it's fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask now a little bit about loyalty and customer loyalty. And I guess the first question to ask with that is, in your experience, what are the key drivers of loyalty? What can businesses really do?
I think it's important when you think about loyalty to, I kind of think of it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if you start at the bottom, you have to deliver consistently on the thing that the customer is purchasing. So like the PetCo, that would be, hey, you order something online and we're delivering that at the time frame that we promised that we would. In an airline context, it's that we're getting you where you need to go on time, safely. So step one is just being consistent and reliable at the core commitments that you made to the customer when they purchased whatever the service or product is. I think that's step one. Then on top of that is building value, right? And so, and this can be really hard because, usually if you're building value, you're investing in cost from a cost perspective or a revenue perspective of the company. But I think consumers more and more are more savvy. And if you're trying to do something, but it's not like you're trying to advertise that you're doing value, but you get into the T's and C's, or you get into it and it's not quite everything that you put in front of the customer, customers will sniff that out. And so making sure that you're building on top of the core commitments with something that is actually valuable for the consumer, I think is really important. And then finally is service recovery. I think service recovery is an art and a science. When you don't meet that commitment, how you respond and how you recover in front of the customer has a big impact on loyalty. And there are a lot of studies that show if something goes wrong and you do a really good job of service recovery, you actually can have a bigger upward impact on loyalty than if everything had gone fine. And so really understanding, being able to identify when things go wrong, do proactive service recovery. And when you do recovery, do something that actually solves the customer's need. Sometimes we can get that part wrong. Like we give them something that has nothing to do with the commitment that we broke or the impact we had on the customer when we broke that commitment. So really understanding what is it that's going to make the customer feel better in the moment about the problem we've created for them. So doing service recovery really well, I think, is important.
Yeah, thank you. And when we're thinking about measuring this loyalty, are there any kind of key bits of advice that you have about measuring loyalty then?
Yeah, a couple things. I think measuring churn and retention with the same vigor that we measure new customer acquisition, I think, is a starting point. In most organizations, there's a huge marketing push on customer acquisition for all the right reasons, and that gets a lot of focus, but maybe not the same level of focus on retention and churn. And so I think bringing those metrics to the forefront is a starting point. The second would be understanding drivers of loyalty and reporting on those. So if you imagine like a cloud software platform, most of them know that if the customer's not using the product and tracking usage and kind of doing things to feed usage, that when it comes to renewal, they're not going to, they're not going to re-up or renew. So understanding what your drivers of loyalty really are and being able to drive those or to report on those. And then I think the way we think about making decisions based on short-term measures versus long-term measures. So how do we track lifetime loyalty? And so we're seeing that trend in addition to more of the short-term level measures, I think is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And I really hear what you say about this huge push constantly about acquisition, which makes total sense. I get that. But yeah, retention and building that loyalty is surely equally as important. I think that's something that I hear a lot of frustrated people kind of feeling like they're bashing their head against a brick wall somewhat. Yeah, with that potentially being ignored somewhat. So we've got a question here from Eamon. So thank you for sending that in, Eamon. And Eamon says that he totally agrees with you that consistency is definitely key and delivering on your promise is super important. So the next part of this is customers don't expect you to over deliver necessarily, but will be happy if you are consistent, and that's the most important bit. So how can you highlight this consistency with numbers and analytics?
Great question. There's I think there's multiple ways to do that. One is making sure that the survey is designed to ask that. And what can be challenging is a lot of us think of surveys as capturing satisfaction, right? But as we talked before, there can be product or policy design components as well as execution components. Sometimes you can start to ask questions that are really about service consistency, meaning did this thing happen? And use that as a way to do it. Better than that, though, is actually having a data hook in the organization around that. So like at PetCo, we track a lot of fulfillment metrics to say, what's the percentage of shipments that left the warehouse on time or left the store on time? What are the percentage of shipments that actually got delivered to the end user on time? So that's, our example of trying to track the actual metric versus asking the customer to tell us whether it happened. So I think having a good strategy, maybe on both of those, because sometimes we might deliver on time based on what our own systems are telling us, but there's something from the customer's perception that where we didn't meet that, and understanding if there's a gap becomes important. But having those kind of consistency metrics and then bringing them into the right venue or putting them in front of business owners in the right way with the right urgency or accountability, I think is key.
Thank you. And I'd like to just ask and maybe finish on, do you have any kind of closing advice or overarching thoughts that you'd like to really impress onto the audience?
I guess I would say just keep fighting the good fight. I know it can be frustrating depending on how the customer experience or customer advocacy function is designed in an organization. And I know it can be an uphill battle sometimes, but I really get energized by the individual examples of where the organization goes above and beyond. We're working on an issue right now where we had a customer come in and talk about how they need a raincoat for their dog, but the manufacturer that we sell only makes up to XL, and their dog needs like an XXL. And so we're actually working with the manufacturer to have a custom raincoat made for a dog, for her dog. And I love stories like that. And so I guess my point being, it's an uphill battle, but it's a really important battle. And celebrate the small wins when they happen, because they're important. And you're in most cases, if not all cases, you're actually positively impacting people's lives. It could be in the smallest way, but your work shows up in a really important way with real customers, and celebrate those wins.
Yeah, I think that is really important to remember, and particularly about kind of energizing your team when they're finding that they are hitting some brick walls. Yeah, super important. And I have to ask, Travis,
Mhm.
Do you know the breed of the dog that needs the XXL coat?
I don't.
Or
I
is it
meant
just
to
a
look
very
it
large
up.
individual?
I know. I apologize. I meant to look it up and I didn't have time, and so I don't know the breed of the dog. But like, I mean, the customer cared enough about the dog to write our CEO and ask for help. So the pet parent is very engaged and loves her dog.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that really lets my imagination run wild about who this dog could possibly be.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Travis. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us here today.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone who tuned in.
Yeah, thanks everyone who tuned in indeed. So feel free to drop when you are ready, Travis. And our next session is going to be delivered to you by our partners over at NPSX.